In this presentation, you will analyze Jackson's policies regarding the Native Americans. So make sure and take good notes, hit pause or rewind when you need to, and as usual, see me if you need clarification on anything. Andrew Jackson's message to Congress on Indian removal, 1830. With the onset of westward expansion and increased contact with Indian tribes, President Jackson set the tone for his position on Indian affairs in his message to Congress on December 6, 1830. Jackson's message justified the removal policy already established by the Indian Removal Act of May 28, 1830. The Indian Removal Act was passed to open up for settlement those lands still held by Indians in states east of the Mississippi River, primarily Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, North Carolina, and others. Jackson declared that removal would incalculably strengthen the southwestern frontier. Clearing Alabama and Mississippi of their Indian populations, he said, would enable those states to advance rapidly in population, wealth, and power. White inhabitants of Georgia were particularly anxious to have the Cherokees removed from the state because gold had been discovered on tribal lands. Violence was commonplace in Georgia, and in all likelihood, a portion of the tribe would have been decimated if they had not been removed. Removal of the Indian tribes continued beyond Jackson's tenure as president. The most infamous of the removals took place in 1838, 2 years after the end of Jackson's final term, when Cherokee Indians were forcibly removed by the military. Their journey west became known as the Trail of Tears because of the thousands of deaths along the way. So here are some facts on Indian removal. Indian removal is that time period that historians study when Native Americans were forcibly moved off their ancestral lands, lands that they had lived on for hundreds, maybe thousands of years, and they were pushed off those lands, sometimes forcibly. Before Manifest Destiny, many lived east of the Mississippi River. Now, there were Native Americans all over the United States, but there were hundreds of thousands, possibly millions, that live east of the Mississippi River. White settlers wanted this land for cotton. The Bureau of Indian Affairs was created by Congress to oversee Indian policy. The Bureau of Indian Affairs was that organization, part of government, that dealt with any policy having to do with the Indians. And the government under Andrew Jackson said that Indians were not citizens. They had no property rights at all. Today, as back then, if someone tried to move you off your land, push you forcibly out of your home, you had rights. You could call the police, you could take them to court, but according to the government, the Indians weren't citizens and they had no property rights. The Seminole Indian tribe in Florida fought bitterly to hold on to their land. So I don't want you to think that all of the Indians just let themselves be pushed off their lands. Some of them fought back, and the Seminole tribe in Florida was one of them. Okay, Worcester versus Georgia, and I know that looks like Worcester, but it's actually pronounced Worcester. Why is it pronounced Worcester? I have no idea, but that's how it's pronounced. 1832, and this is a court case. Anytime you see this in the title, that means that there was a case that was tried in front of a court and there was a decision made. So surrounding this case, the Cherokee Indians actually took the government to court and said, these are our lands, we were here before you, and we believe that we should have the right to be on these lands. And it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the United States Supreme Court, the Supreme Court justice actually said, quote, the Cherokees have an unquestionable right to their lands. So, Supreme Court said the Indians can stay there and the government can't force them off their land. Now, Andrew Jackson, being the man and the president that he was, responded to the Supreme Court, and he responded directly to Chief Justice John Marshall. This is the top guy on the Supreme Court. And he said, quote, John Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it. So that's pretty serious. Andrew Jackson is saying to the Supreme Court, I'm not going to follow what you said. You can say whatever you want, but let's see you enforce your decision. And that says a lot about Andrew Jackson's personality. Now, this brings up some questions about something that Thomas Jefferson wrote. Hopefully, you've seen that the Indians were treated very poorly, and you're going to see even further that they're treated even worse, which is a bit of a conundrum. It's kind of confusing because Thomas Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So, under Jackson and his predecessors, they really aren't treating the Indians equally, and they don't seem to believe that the Indians were endowed by their Creator with unalienable rights. So, this is one of those times when it seems like people are saying one thing but doing another. Which brings us to the Trail of Tears. I'm going to show you some artwork here in a little bit that I think conveys the emotion having to do with this really terrible event. Okay, here's a map that kind of shows here's where the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, these are all Indian tribes. Here's the Seminole. If you look at the key here, you can see the paths that these Indian tribes were forced to take. Tribal areas are in dark, and this is the reservation, which was over in this area. And you can see the paths that the Indians were forced to walk. And this land is some of the worst land in the United States, and these are tribal lands that the Indians had lived on for decades, for centuries, and they were forced by the military to walk all this way, the Trail of Tears, and thousands died. Okay, the following slides contain some frequently asked questions about this time period. I will read the questions aloud. As I do, pause the video and read the answers to yourself. The Trail of Tears, a Native American perspective. Long ago, what did the Cherokee elders predict about the Cherokee homeland? According to one Cherokee member of the Kituwa Society, why did the Trail of Tears occur? According to a Cherokee storyteller, what do many Indians call the Trail of Tears? What does this name mean? In the past, how did the Cherokee choose or identify their members? Today, how does the United States government define an Indian? How did the Cherokee Nation try to avoid conflict with white settlers? How did Jackson respond to the Supreme Court ruling in Worcester versus Georgia? Describe how governmental policies discriminated against Native Americans in the early 1800s. What alternative actions could the government have used in dealing with Native Americans during the migration of white settlers? Explain why many white settlers felt justified in their settlement of Native American land. Okay, now I'm going to show you some paintings And I want you to look at them and think about them and see if you get any emotion coming from them. And hopefully they can allow you to feel what the Indians felt. How many reservations, tribes, and Native Americans exist today? What are some of the serious problems that Native Americans must deal with? How do Native Americans cope with their problems? Describe the different ways that Native Americans earn a living in today's world. Jackson's forced removal of Native American tribes from their homes undoubtedly had a long-term devastating effect. Indians were forced to leave their ancestral homes, including farms, businesses, and other material possessions, to whites. Many Indians probably never recovered from the economic losses that they suffered, explaining the high rates of unemployment and poverty. The land, structures, and supplies that were provided by the government to displaced Indians were inadequate. Those who survived the Trail of Tears probably experienced depression and hopelessness, possibly leading to substance abuse, diseases, and high rates of suicide. Many Native American groups have prospered despite their treatment at the hands of Andrew Jackson and the United States government. Drawing strength from their tribal heritage and relying on pride in the culture, many Native Americans have established highly successful businesses. Indians have taken advantage of the natural resources on their reservations, engaging in traditional occupations such as hunting, fishing, farming, and ranching. Today, Native Americans make and sell Indian crafts and jewelry, operate gambling casinos, and profit from tourism. While modern Native Americans face many problems, they also exhibit great diversity in the ways they have adapted to change. This is just an example of the many, many Indian tribes that existed and many still exist all around the United States. Once again, if you have any questions, please let me know. See me for clarification, and hopefully you've learned a lot from this presentation.